A decorated Army colonel, faced with the remains of a fallen soldier and a flight he was denied, found himself in a situation that would soon shake the entire nation. The airport buzzed with activity. Families pulling rolling suitcases, business travelers absorbed in their phones, children darting ahead of tired parents. The usual chaos. Colonel David Carter walked in, his polished dress shoes clicking against the tile floor. He was no stranger to this routine. But today was different. The weight on his chest wasn't just from the medals and ribbons adorning his uniform. It was from the casket on the tarmac, draped in the American flag. Private First Class Jason Reynolds, only 21 years old, gone too soon. Colonel Carter straightened his uniform and took a steadying breath. He had a responsibility, a duty that transcended rank or recognition. It wasn't about him. It was about honoring every soldier who never made it back home. No one is left behind. He walked up to the airline counter, placing his military orders and ID on the desk. The woman behind the counter barely looked at him, typing something into her computer, her brow furrowed. Then she paused, a fraction of a second too long. "Sir, may I see that again?" she asked, her voice tight. Carter handed over his paperwork, watching her closely. Her hesitation was unmistakable. The furtive glance she exchanged with her colleague, the slight shift in her posture, like she walked into something she wasn't prepared for. She whispered to another agent, who scanned her with an unreadable expression. When she returned, her smile was stiff, forced. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Carter exhaled slowly, his calm demeanor masking his confusion. He had dealt with countless challenging situations, combat zones, diplomatic conflicts, political negotiations, but this was different. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he said, voice even, tapping the paperwork. "Everything is in order." The agent didn't meet his gaze. "I understand, sir, but there's security protocol, and we can't override it." "Security protocol?" Carter repeated, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "Yes, sir," she replied, forcing another weak smile. "It's just policy." Carter didn't flinch. "What policy?" Behind him, the line had started to grow. People shifted, murmuring. He could feel their eyes on him, but instead of stepping aside, he squared his shoulders and stood his ground. He wasn't going anywhere without an explanation. But the airline staff wasn't backing down either. The tension at the counter thickened as conversations in the line fell quiet. It was rare to see a man in uniform denied a flight, especially under such circumstances. Colonel Carter remained composed, his voice steady. "Ma'am, I need to understand exactly what the issue is. This is a military assignment, not a personal trip. My documentation is valid." The agent hesitated again, her eyes flicking to the other staff huddled in the back, whispering. Then a supervisor, a man in his mid-50s with a tired expression, stepped forward. He adjusted his name tag and folded his arms, giving Carter a measured look. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience," he said, his tone laced with the kind of politeness meant to end the conversation. "But we have certain policies in place, and unfortunately, we can't override them at this time." That word again. Policies. Carter took a slow breath. He had seen this before, just in a different form. "I've flown with military escorts before," Colonel Carter said, his voice steady, suppressing the frustration that lingered beneath years of military discipline. "I know the procedure, and I know there's no policy preventing me from boarding. So let's be honest. What's the real reason I'm being denied?" The supervisor cleared his throat, shifting his weight uneasily. "It's just an extra security measure. Nothing personal, sir." "Nothing personal?" Carter's jaw tightened, but he kept his anger in check. He had been in too many situations where vague explanations like this were used to test his patience. They wanted him to lose his cool, to give them a reason to call security. But he wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. People in line behind him were starting to notice, murmuring among themselves. A woman in a red blazer leaned toward her husband, whispering. A young man, boarding pass in hand, frowned, glancing between the airline employees as though trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, a voice cut through the tension. "Sir, do you have an issue with his military clearance?" Carter turned his head slightly. A man, maybe in his mid-60s, with a weathered face and a USMC hat pulled low over his brow, had spoken up. A Marine, a veteran. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. "No, sir, this isn't about clearance. We just have to follow standard protocol." The Marine scoffed his frustration. "Obvious. I've been through security 1,000 times, and I've never seen protocol stop a soldier from escorting one of our own home." He folded his arms across his chest. "So what is it then?" The murmurs in the line grew louder, some people pulling out their phones to record. The air in the terminal felt different now. Charged. The airline staff would feel it, too. The agent who had initially denied Carter's boarding cast a furtive glance at her supervisor, who appeared uncertain. The supervisor let out a sigh, rubbing his temples, as though the weight of the situation was suddenly sinking in. He looked at Carter again, his gaze now weighed down with the gravity of the moment. "Let me check something," he muttered before walking off. The agent behind the counter kept her gaze fixed on her computer screen, suddenly very interested in whatever was on her screen. Carter didn't move. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, staring straight ahead. He wasn't going anywhere. But neither was this story. The murmur in the terminal, once a soft hum in the background, had now become the focus of everyone around them. It wasn't just the usual chatter about flights. People were watching, recording. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket, clutching her purse, shook her head and leaned toward her husband. "This isn't right," she muttered. "He's in uniform." A younger man, wearing a hoodie, pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. People were taking notice, and that was dangerous for the airline. Carter's expression remained unreadable, but inside, he was taking note of every detail. The supervisor hadn't returned yet, which meant one of two things. Either he was scrambling for an excuse, or he was hoping the tension would die down. But neither was going to happen. Then, from behind him came a voice. "Excuse me, sir." Carter turned his head slightly. A young woman, no older than 25, stood a few feet away, her phone in hand. Her eyes were uncertain, but determined. I don't mean to intrude," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "But I just want to make sure I understand. They're not letting you board." Her words weren't loud, but they carried, drawing even more attention. People nearby, once distracted, turned their heads toward the exchange. Carter exhaled, glancing at the agent behind the counter. "That's correct." The young woman blinked, as if she had expected a different answer. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded once, turning her phone toward him. "I'm live right now," she said. "People need to see this." And with that, the floodgates opened. Another man raised his phone. "This is wrong," he said, shaking his head. "This man is literally escorting a fallen soldier home." A woman further back in the line raised her voice. "Hey, excuse me," she called, waving her hand toward the counter. "Can someone explain why he's being denied?" A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to get involved. But the energy in the room had changed. What began as quiet murmurs had now evolved into something much bigger, something the airline staff could no longer ignore. The agent behind the counter, once stern and composed, now looked like she wanted to shrink into the floor. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, but her eyes kept flicking nervously toward the cameras pointed in her direction. The Marine from earlier stepped forward again, clearly done with politeness. He was no longer playing nice. "I've seen a lot of things in my time," he said, his voice steady but firm. "But I never thought I'd see the day when an American soldier, especially one escorting the remains of a brother in arms, would be treated like this." The terminal grew eerily quiet. Even the usual overhead announcements seemed distant, muted. The only sounds were the beeps from phones, recording every second of what was unfolding. The Marine squared his shoulders. "This is a disgrace." "Disgrace," the agent murmured under her breath, swallowing hard. Her fingers trembled as she clicked at her keyboard again. The supervisor was still nowhere to be seen. Passengers whispered among themselves. A baby fussed in its stroller, but the mother, rather than soothing her child, was staring at her phone, her face twisted in disgust. Then, from somewhere at the back of the line, a man muttered, It's already trending. Carter didn't move. He didn't need to. The world was watching now. The tension in the terminal thickened. The supervisor was still missing, and the airline staff remained frozen in awkward silence. Phones were out, recording, tweeting, streaming. And then, like a spark hitting dry grass, it spread. The young man in the hoodie, still glued to his phone, let out a low whistle. Damn, this is everywhere now. Carter didn't react. He knew better than to celebrate too soon. But from the way the agent behind the counter stiffened, he could tell she knew it, too. The woman in the denim jacket checked her phone and gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. To her husband, "It's already on Facebook." The older Marine grunted and pulled out his own phone. They don't even know what kind of storm they just started. Then, as if on cue, the airport's loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be delayed. We apologize for any inconvenience." A few groans rippled through the crowd, but most people weren't paying attention to the announcement anymore. Their focus was now solely on the uniformed soldier being denied his flight while carrying out his duty. A minute later, a young woman near the windows gasped. "He's on Twitter." She turned her phone toward the crowd, and people leaned in. A tweet in bold. Capital letters appeared on the screen. They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. This is how we treat our heroes. Hashtag let him fly. Underneath the tweet, the numbers were climbing. Retweets, comments, likes. It was catching fire. Then another tweet popped up, this one from a veteran advocacy group. "We are aware of the disgraceful incident happening at airport name. Our soldiers deserve better. Expect action." The crowd murmured, the realization sinking in. The airline had officially lost control of the narrative. The agent behind the counter, still frozen in place, let out a shaky breath and hurried toward the back, disappearing behind a frosted glass door. She wasn't returning with answers. She was coming back with damage control. Carter adjusted his hat. He had been in situations like this before, though not at an airport. Not like this, but in places where powerful people suddenly realized they had made the wrong enemy. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about him. It was about Private First Class Jason Reynolds, the young man waiting to go home. And right now, that mission was still incomplete. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were waiting. The terminal felt different now, charged, expectant. Then, finally, the supervisor returned, but he wasn't alone. A second man walked beside him, dressed in a sleek navy suit, his airline ID clipped neatly to his pocket. His stride was brisk, controlled, like someone used to putting out fires. He stopped just short of the counter, scanning the scene. His eyes darted between Carter, the Marine, and the rows of phones still recording. He cleared his throat. "Colonel, I apologize for the miscommunication. There seems to have been an error with our system, but we're working to get you on your flight as soon as possible." Miscommunication, Carter thought to himself. He had been in the military long enough to know exactly what that word meant. It meant we got caught. It meant fix this before it costs us too much. Carter didn't respond right away. Instead, he let the silence hang, watching the airline representative shift under the weight of the moment. "I see," Carter finally said, his voice even. "An error, you said?" "Yes, sir." The airline rep quickly responded, his discomfort palpable. "A regrettable mistake. We assure you it was not intentional." A few people in the crowd scoffed. The Marine shook his head. The airline rep adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "We'd like to personally escort you to the gate now. Colonel, first class accommodations, of course." First class. Carter thought, as if that's the point. He looked past the airline rep toward the counter, where the agent who had denied him still stood, eyes trained anywhere but on him. The same agent who had smiled stiffly at him when she turned him away. The same one who hadn't even bothered to check before saying no. Carter exhaled slowly. "I appreciate the urgency," he said evenly, "but I need to clarify something." The airline rep nodded quickly. "Of course." Carter's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it. If no one had recorded this, if no one had spoken up, would I still be standing here? A beat of silence hung in the air. The rep swallowed hard. Sir, You don't need to answer, Carter interrupted, his eyes locked on the man. The rep already knew. Everyone in the terminal knew. Everyone knows the truth, Carter said, cutting him off. The room fell into a heavy silence. The airline rep pressed his lips together tightly, realizing he had lost the argument. Carter turned to face the crowd, then back to the agent who had denied him. I don't need first class, he said, his voice unwavering. I don't need special treatment. I need respect. And so does the soldier I'm escorting. A murmur rippled through the crowd in agreement. The rep nodded stiffly, his options clearly exhausted. Understood, sir, he said, his voice thin. The Marine standing nearby gave a small approving grunt. Carter adjusted his hat and turned toward the door. Now let's finish this mission. But for the airline, the fallout was just beginning. The damage was done and the airline had lost control of the situation. The story had already gone viral, spreading far faster than they could contain it. The terminal now felt more like a press conference. Phones were still recording, passengers still watching. Then, unexpectedly, a man in a dark blue suit with the unmistakable posture of someone with real authority stepped into the scene. He wasn't from the airline, nor was he airport security. He was military. The crowd instinctively moved aside as he approached. His ID badge flashed briefly as he walked up to Carter and extended his hand. Colonel, he said firmly, I'm Major Thomas Beckett from the Department of the Army. We've been informed of the situation. Carter shook his hand, his grip firm. He didn't need to ask how the major arrived so quickly. The military doesn't hesitate when it comes to their own. Major Beckett turned to the airline rep, his voice crisp and authoritative. We're handling this now. Colonel Carter and the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds will not be flying commercial. The airline rep blinked, clearly thrown off. Sir, You were just about to cover your tracks, Beckett interrupted, his tone polite but full of weight. He glanced at Carter before continuing. The Pentagon has arranged for a private military flight. Your transport is waiting. A murmur spread through the crowd as people exchanged glances. The U.S. military had stepped in. Carter exhaled, not out of relief, but because the mission was finally back on track. He gave a small nod toward Major Beckett. Understood, Major. Beckett's gaze flicked back to the airline rep. This will be addressed. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Carter turned back to the Marine who had been watching the exchange, satisfaction evident on his face. Appreciate you, brother, Carter said, giving a nod of gratitude. The Marine tipped his head. We look out for our own. Carter took one last look around the terminal. The passengers who had spoken up, who had refused to stay silent, who had made sure the story was heard. He squared his shoulders, adjusted his uniform, and walked out, not toward the gate, but toward something bigger. For the airline, the consequences were just beginning. They thought it would fade with a few apologies, a press release, maybe a statement from the CEO. But the public wasn't letting it go. News outlets picked up the story. Veterans organizations condemned the airline's actions. Politicians demanded accountability. Then came the financial hit. By the end of the week, the airline stock had dropped, and a trending hashtag calling for a boycott gained momentum. Customers flooded the airline's social media, demanding answers. Then, the final blow came, a lawsuit. A coalition of military advocacy groups filed a formal complaint against the airline for discrimination and failure to uphold service member protections. Under immense pressure, the airline CEO made a public appearance. He called the incident a regrettable misunderstanding and announced that the employees involved had been placed on administrative leave. But it was too little, too late. Meanwhile, Colonel Carter continued his mission. He escorted Private First Class Jason Reynolds home, standing by as the young soldier's family received him for the last time. Carter didn't need the headlines. He didn't need the attention. What he needed was respect. And that was the real fight. Respect shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't require a viral video or public outrage to be given. It should be the standard. The people at that airport, The Marine, the passengers who spoke up, the ones who refused to stay silent. Prove something important. When people stand together, justice has nowhere to hide. If you believe in accountability, if you believe in honoring those who serve, let your voice be heard. Because silence lets things like this happen again. And next time, it might not go viral,